Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Knoke, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's session, culminating the Advancing Outcomes with Asset Leadership series. We have a number of speakers today, some you will see on your screen before you, and even others as well. And Mike, I have a slide up here that I thought you might want to talk about, but maybe I'll come back to this after thanking our patron members, as well as other organizational members, including Serco, Jacobs, and more. And with that, I will just say this week's sponsor is Jacobs for this program and our newsletter. And next week's ALN Thursday at 3, the start of 2023, is with Peter Duffy. Sorry, I still have David Brewer written there, but Peter Duffy is next Thursday's guest. And with that, Mike, Executive Director for the Asset Leadership Network, why don't you take us away?
Okay, well, thanks, Nick. And I'm happy to report that here in Chicago, it's in the 50s. Nick is traveling with his family now. Where are you at, Nick?
We're in Richmond, just left Northern Virginia yesterday.
And how are things there?
Excellent. It was a lovely day out here.
And another panelist we have, Cecilia Mowatt, will be joining us from Colombia, where she has been on the beach recently. So I'm sure the temperature, the weather report will be very good from there. But before we talk with David, and David exemplifies the best of our military and our corporate management. It's been a pleasure getting to know him, and I really look forward to talking with him. I want to talk about the Asset Leadership Network's outcomes and the types of outcomes that we are looking to advance. And in today's news, not surprisingly, in Buffalo, the electricity got turned on quicker in affluent and white neighborhoods. That's not news really, but it's good to be reminded that we need to be more equitable. And we at the Asset Leadership Network are actually crazy enough to think that asset management is a way to provide that equity. And David turned me on to this wonderful corn story that I hope he will talk with us about after he gets his other comments in. And so that's why there's that field of corn there. And Nick, you can stop sharing those, and we'll bring David Brewer on. David was with the Air Force. He's a retired colonel, and then he went into private industry in 2008, was that, or 2006?
2006, yeah.
Okay. And started off with CMH2, and then they merged with Jacobs, and so he's been consistently with top quality asset management. So welcome, David. How are you doing?
Excellent. Doing well. Thank you, Mike. And
where are you?
Where am I?
Yes.
I am in Kitsap County, west of Seattle. So we actually just we spent the evening in Seattle for our anniversary. My wife and I have been married for 3 years, and so we had our third anniversary in Seattle and came back on the ferry to much calmer, much more rural area. So I live in Paulsbo, Washington is the name of the town.
I'm familiar with that area, and I really love taking that Bremerton ferry and seeing the skyline of Seattle as you close in on it. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
So did you have any, kind of wanted you to have some time to explain your experience?
Sure.
And talk about, how you got where you're at in your asset management journey and relate that to outcomes, because you've been seeing outcomes your entire career.
Yeah, you bet. So my Air Force journey took me from initially enlisting in the Air Force in 1978, and then retiring in 2006. So it was if you look at the history timeline of our country, a lot of things have happened across that timeline, to include several conflicts and different budget challenges, different things across that time frame. And so I got to experience it first as enlisted on the aircraft maintenance side, and then moved into engineering. And for the Air Force, engineering takes many different molds. And I think many of the listeners and many of our ALN colleagues know Mike Imany. Mike Imany was one of my bosses in the Pentagon in the tail end of my career. And he mentioned, early in his relationship with Asset Leadership Network that, we as Air Force engineers end up doing asset management. We just didn't realize we were doing asset management all that time. But we get to look at it from not only the facilities and infrastructure perspective, but also from the environmental perspective because of the responsibilities that we had. And so what I found in my career and my journey is that while our role was to make engineering type things happen for our bases and our installations, our missions, as we would call them, we also had to understand the mission in a way that not everyone else at the table had to understand. And so one of the conversations that took place last week and through the course of this month was communicating and working out or working through the silos of organizations, whether it be a silo of a flying unit versus a ground unit versus a Navy or Marine unit. We had to work through silos in order for the mission to be met. And so that's a common theme as far as my journey was, being sometimes the person in the room that would pull together the conversation towards what do we need to do to support this mission, because everyone would be standing over their piece of paper and their agenda and want to make sure that agenda got pushed through, but we needed to support it from an asset perspective or from a facility perspective. And so learning that early in a career was important to be successful in the Air Force. And then moving that into the corporate world, I stayed mostly within the federal environment, although I did get a great opportunity to work with our commercial clients. But it was in that owner perspective where, from an owner's perspective, you need to be supported in a lot of ways, but you own it. At the end of the day, when people go home, you own the infrastructure, you own the real estate, you own the roads that lead to it. And so how do you take care of those things so your people can come back to work, so you have a productive environment, so you have equity within the whole process. And so seeing it from an Air Force side as an owner to move into a corporate side as an owner with our clients, that was an eye-opener, because at the end of the day, we had as consultants still needed to make a profit in doing that, but we also needed our clients to be successful. And some of our commercial clients that I had the pleasure to work with were our confidential clients, but they were counting on us as Jacobs to deliver in a way that would keep them profitable, to keep their name, their brand name secure. And they count on us to do that. And so not unlike what I was responsible for with the Air Force, but it just a different bent on it.
Did you see that breaking down silos was as important in the corporate world as it was in the military, or even more so, perhaps?
Well, absolutely, because at the end of the day, when you're a publicly traded company, at the end of the day, you got to make money. And so one of the silos that I encountered in a positive way, because in many cases, whenever you present a business case for an innovation or a change, it generally gets supported because the business case is, this will make us more efficient, this will make us improve our brand, improve our clients and the likelihood that they would going to come back to us for things. So, but make no mistake, when cost-cutting measures have to take place, everyone has to be in line to listen and to keep keep us viable. And so sometimes a tech refresh doesn't take place as fast as you'd like for it to take place. And that's one of those silos that I picked up in all of the discussions, is that while you might put a policy in place or put a process in place, if it's not fully communicated, if it isn't consistent in a fashion that you're not changing 1 week after another, or a month after another, or a quarter after another, whatever layer of progression that you're in, then it doesn't get followed. And then that's where sometimes the stovepipes start to come into place, or the silos start to come into place, is that something for the goodness of the finances might need to take place, but we don't take the time or have the time to reflect on how that tech refresh may impact the strategy or the long-term goal until you present the business case to say, we need to move forward. We understand that we need to tighten our belts a little bit here, but we need to move forward with this technology to keep us in the right place. So.
Well, you are involved in something that I think is critical, the Mission Dependency Index of the Air Force. Right. How does that help break down silos?
So thank you for mentioning that. I cannot take credit for the name or the actual implementation of it, but I do recall having to go to the Pentagon and defend why in Air Education and Training Command we needed more dormitory dollars, and they would call it dormitory dollars, than a fighter mission might need, when from the Pentagon's perspective, it was the dormitory investment strategy was spread across equitably, meaning it was peanut butter spread around, everyone got their fair share, and could not understand why we needed more. In fact, we wanted about half of the Air Force's budget within Air Education and Training Command. And we had to step back and ask, why aren't they understanding it? Because we saw it clearly that our training flight line, our mission flight line, were dormitories, dining facilities, and classrooms. If we didn't have those three items, we could not put through the training quotas that we needed to replenish and keep the force ready. And so we had to sit down and think, why are we messing up here? Well, it had to deal with that a dorm, from Pentagon's perspective, a dormitory is a dormitory is a dormitory, and it's not. And it was on our shoulders to explain why it was not. And so Dave Brewer had to pack up his bag and go to the Pentagon and explain it to the corporate staff at the Pentagon as to why it wasn't. And I had a lot of advocates helping me, but also had a lot of opponents in the conversation too. But what it evolved to was, how do we, from a consistent and objective perspective, code facilities or infrastructure to show the mission's dependency on that being revitalized, that critical resource being available, so that the answer to the why are we doing this that Jack Dempsey reminds us of is that we're doing this because we need to train airmen to be ready to go into combat. So fast forward, and that was in the early 2000s, fast forward to around the 2015, 16, 17 timeframe, the idea of a mission dependency index where we tie dormitories at training facilities tied to the training mission, not a quality of life discussion, which is still a highly needed and critical thing, but it's an entirely different. It's as much as important to the mission as the runway is to a flying mission. So,
excellent. I think that one of the defense benefits that we have is the idea of mission. Yeah, my father's also a retired colonel. He was in the Marines and actually then switched to Army Corps of Engineers. But I learned from a young age that mission is really important. Soldier, you're going to that top of that hill, whether you make or not. And therefore, the military is one of the best education systems in the world to get people to be able to understand why their mission is that important. Now, luckily in civilian world, we're not always dealing with life and death situations, but as the blizzard in Buffalo shows, yeah, we frequently are. And we owe a lot to our first responders who put their life at risk to help people whose life is at risk. And last week, Jim said how clear it was that the Coast Guard is saving people from drowning. It's the mission. So anyway, I loved ISO 55001 when I read your strategic asset management plan shall support your organizational objectives. Okay, we've got a mission-focused document for every organization in the world. And when you focus on mission, personal egos, my department should be bigger, goes away. Does it support the mission? And last week, James Down taught us that the Air Force has half as many people as it did, I believe, 20 years ago. That was astounding. And yet it's still achieving its mission because it's using strategic approaches. So that's my mission focus.
Well, thank you for that. But yeah, every organization or town or corporation has a mission that they're trying to take care of. Or why would they be there? Is what it amounts to. And so the leadership part to this discussion that you've been having is key. What does that look like? And how do you get to it? And the other takeaway for me, Mike, has been the discussion on not just once you get either policy in place through leadership or necessity, whichever comes first, then you have to implement it. Chris Gawley was very clear about that last week and saying you can have all of this on the shelf and all these presentations, but if you don't implement it, then it will sit there. And I think one of the keys to that, and I'll close with what I guess you prompted me for the corn to get to that. That when you move into that implementation stage, in the journey of implementing isn't something that's overnight. I think Stephanie from the Portland presentation really talked about that. You got to figure out where you are, whether you're in catch up or keep up, or you're finally in the get ahead stage of it. But that journey is continuous. It is arduous, and at any point in time, you could have a setback for whatever the reason. And so I think one of the promptings that you have consistently had since the first presentation in December is about best practices and how you share those and how you move through that. And so that is a future that I can see ALN helping with, not only through the policy perspective in Washington and other places, but as we collect best practices or help enable best practices, we get to that point where others can benefit from it. And then when others benefit, we will benefit. We meaning you decide where you are in that that aspect, whether it's a company or city or a country in that aspect. So to get to the point of the corn story,
yes,
I will paraphrase it. It is. You can find this story in many different ways, presented by many different perspectives. But what it amounts to is that a farmer was found to have grown champion quality, high quality corn for many, many, many years. And somewhere along the way, someone said, "Hey, maybe we should go ask him how what's his secret? How does he do this?" And so during the conversation, the newspaper reporter, you can imagine showing, here we are in the cornfields here talking to Farmer John. And during the conversation, the farmer shared that, when I finish the season, I share some of my corn with my neighbors. And the reporter was astonished and said, why would you do that? These are people that compete against you in the marketplace and for awards. Well, why would you share your corn with them? And says, well, don't you know, young man, that when the wind blows, the pollen from ripening corn swirls around from field to field. And if my neighbors are growing poor quality corn, and when it comes time for cross-pollination, my corn will be impacted. So it's important that they also grow good quality corn. And that doesn't mean that they shares every secret, but he does know that they're starting from a good place. And so that's where we are in the asset management world, is that there's a lot of good news stories, a lot of lessons learned that we could be sharing and should share for the betterment. And the simple reason is that, one of the things I learned in life in the Air Force is that while you might be on a federal installation with a fence line around it and rules and all sorts of things, and uniforms and guards at the gate, the rules and the laws of physics don't change at the fence line. Air still, what we do on a base can impact air, it can impact water, it can impact our neighbors, can impact our families. And so the corn story kind of fits that what happens if we can help others be better, then we'll be better as well.
Well, David, I'd like to use that as our 2023 theme. And I'll get back to you about that.
Okay.
I think it's really a wonderful analogy of what the ALN is trying to do, our rapid deployment of best practices. And so thank you for sharing the corn story. And I got to tell you, I did send it to Meighan to entice her to come and talk, and she loved it. So Meighan, thank you for joining us. And thank you for Serco's ongoing membership with the Asset Leadership Network. Where are you today?
I'm actually in Crystal City, Virginia.
Because I know you were just in Australia. But yeah, glad you're home for the holidays.
Yes, I'll go back one more time, and I'm going to meet with the folks you've matched me up with for dinner.
Excellent.
Peter and Ashley, the next time I go back. So thank you for matchmaking for me.
That's what the network does. So
that's right.
So what have you been thinking about outcomes with what you've been seeing?
Well, it's funny. I am very much in that implementing policy approach and tearing down those silos and cross-pollinating in my day in and out, day out job. And actually, this year I've turned more internal inside Serco than I was external. So most of my work has been external to Serco. It's a service we provide is to deploy software to help asset and facility management for many of our large organizations we support. But inside Serco, we realized that we need to do a little bit of taking our own medicine, and do better at living what we preach. And so I've been working internally to cross-pollinate asset management automations and improvements and implementing that policy so that we can get better about the exact same things that Dave mentioned. This is our brand. This is how we execute. This is how we achieve better efficiencies internally for the good of how we deliver our services internally and externally. And it's funny, Dave Brewer and I actually have a mutual acquaintance in Mike Imany. I actually saw him at the Crab Fest in October over at Andrews because I'm affiliated with the Air Force as well. So when you said that, I'm like, oh, I just ran into Mike a couple months ago. So
that Crab Fest, I think, started like either the year before I arrived in the Pentagon or while I was there. It was just incredible. So it was great to see that.
It's a great event, and I try and go as often as I can. So I think I have one more left, and then we're on the retired side. So, but it was interesting that you brought him up. So the other part of what I've been working on, Mike, though, is actually in the ESG, the environmental social governance realm. And we're actually expanding our footprint into that lane because it builds first of all, ESG is very much in the news as a requirement, both corporately and federally, to report it and to do better about tracking our footprint. in the sustainability and environmental realms. And so with that, it builds upon asset and facility management record keeping. And so it's a natural progression for where we're working and where we're stretching our team to grow and improve outcomes for our customers. And so that's kind of a fun new area we're branching into.
We need to connect you with Mary Adams, who has a company that's a member, and she has ESG thoughts that are really advanced. So maybe we can do some type of panel. And then also, if you need an internal executive briefing, we can do that for you also. So we're having a panel and a planning meeting at the same time.
Perfect. That'll be good. I would love to participate. And if not
So
me, someone from my team will participate for sure.
Okay, great. So do you have any examples of from your history of asset management that address the advancing outcomes and getting the policy off of the shelf and into implementation?
Yes, actually. So one of my projects that I've been working on for about 3 years now started as an asset management. I helped them to write their SAMP. I did their first kind of initial assessment for ISO 55000. Were they ready? And where could they improve? They didn't actually they weren't going for certification. So it was just kind of an informal, here's a benchmark, here's something to think about, opportunity that I worked with them. And so after that, we've actually been doing incremental facility condition assessments throughout their portfolio. And our first one was a pilot. It didn't have a lot of outcomes that were, except that they knew there was a lot of data they didn't have before that they knew they needed to capture. So when we did the second one, what was interesting is that they had just renovated the building. So it should have been a new condition assessment, but it wasn't, because the columns supporting the building were crumbling. So although they had just spent I think it was about $120 million on the renovation of the building, it was unoccupiable. It was like everything they'd been advocating to their leadership about why they needed asset management was smack in the middle of their faces going, this is why we needed to do this years ago. And so it just seeded asset management and the policy from a nice to have to no kidding, we have to do it. And we went very quickly from concept to adoption. And so what Dave said was very true. In my experience, getting to that adoption is the hardest part. And once you get there, it's like smooth sailing, but it is a journey and you have to keep after it. But if you don't, the consequences are steep.
Well, in terms of planning for 2023, one of the things we're thinking of is, instead of ALN talking about benefits, is talking about the tragedies that will happen if you don't do the work. And that's one of those stories. And we don't want to be ambulance chasers. We don't want to be negative, but it seems to be that a stoplight does not get put up until there's an accident.
Right.
And we need to get ahead of that type of thinking. So some of the outcomes that the ALN is looking for is a change in leadership attitude, to not be reactive, but to be proactive. I think that's maybe too simple, but it comes down to that.
It does.
And
it does.
We need the success stories from you, your clients, and Jacob's clients to advocate, do it before there's trouble, because there's plenty of trouble stories out there. And there's enough organizations that maybe we can get the word out to more and more of them. Absolutely.
Another example of an outcome, and it also is a recent project I've done, but customer had an opportunity to do an updated chiller program at one of their campuses. And so they put the chiller in, and sure enough, a year later, it failed miserably. It was actually root cause analysis is a very basic step in the process of installation. They should have replaced there's a shipping lubricant that they put in the chillers. and it's supposed to be replaced and flushed, and it wasn't, or was done improperly. Had that been known initially, they could have obviously gone back to the folks who installed it to get it rectified, but two, they probably could have done a warranty claim. They didn't find the root cause until they were outside of a warranty phase as it was. And so, it's those after, it's not only knowing the asset, it's being able to track it through the whole life cycle. And that data drives those outcomes. And so being able to track your data, report on your data, get the visibility, gets you to adoption, gets you to an asset management mindset. And so he uses that story a lot. My customer does to amplify why asset management is so vital to have as a culture.
And it's something that we've been saying and will continue to say, is that data is an asset.
It is.
And in the information age, of course, managing your information assets is critical. And Art Kurland isn't on today, but he was he's with University Health. They're creating a 16-story women's and children's tower. And it's supposed to open in June. And and he had good advice for them that was not too late for them to take. And so, they're following his good advice, and that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear those examples, Meighan. Thank you so much.
Thank you
And
for
we're going
inviting
to have open discussion in a bit here, but I am so happy to say that Cecilia Mowatt, President of Strategies and Site, is joining us from Colombia. So we have an international representative. Oh, and she is on the beach. You're muted.
I am here, but not on the beach. I came off of the beach because the Wi-Fi was so bad and I didn't trust it. Happy holidays, everybody. And boy, I have just enjoyed listening to Meighan and David speak on these issues because they hit the hard ones. When you talk about the issue of mission, when you talk about communication, and when you talk about the whole issue of making sure that everybody knows what the end mission is and everybody's included in it. And what you say, Miguel, I got to do a quick shout out. It wouldn't be right, being that I'm in Colombia, to not shout out Daniel Ortega, because he is king of risk management, which is so much a part of ISO 55000. But, one of the things that he always says is that's the key underlining this standard and all of the to-do lists, because it's risk management on all levels, making sure that we are taking care of the mission and understanding it, making sure we're taking care of the communication, the assets. When you say data-driven, Meighan, I want to say that we're really also talking about data comes from where and who. Data is not something that just comes out of the air. It comes from people, and the people are the key. My favorite, and I'm always going to say it, Miguel, my favorite is 4.2 in ISO 55001, making sure that we are taking into consideration all the relevant stakeholders and expanding the definition of what is relevant and who is relevant, and making sure that that is something we do all the way through from inception of the mission. What should the mission be, and who, because what we're doing to somebody, with somebody, for somebody, against somebody, whatever, but you need to know who the somebodies are. And we have the issue, and Jim might speak to what they're looking at, of when we say stakeholders in ISO 4.2, 55001 4.2, stakeholders is a term that we may want to be careful with and start rethinking whether or not we use another term that's more inclusive, because the idea is anybody that is possibly impacted by what you're doing needs to be included and considered and informed and part of the game. And
Impacted parties, Cecilia, that might be a good one.
Interested parties, that's the one.
No, impacted
impacted parties.
Well, not to decide right now, but I just.
Not to decide right now. I know that interested is one under consideration, but impacted could be under consideration too. The idea is who was saying we all want to be happy and make sure we're healthy. You were talking earlier, David, about the outcome being one where we both have airman safety, but also quality of life. And you're taking it all into consideration, and it's inclusion at its highest point, right? And when we look at ESG, Mary McAdams, her methodology is very excellent, and we have to be raising our hands in the ALN world to also help with the measurement using the standards and using 55,000 and other ISO standards to not just go to the quantitative standards of FASB, which is where ESG is heading, but to take it to a more qualitative level that takes everything into consideration and everyone into consideration. I'll stop my preaching for a moment, but the beach lets you reflect.
Well, I want to mention that Cecilia's been active in the ALN Espanol Asset Leadership Board, and one of the things that we'll want to do in 2023 is further engage that. We've always had good response when we involve all the relevant stakeholders from around the Americas, and that's an outcome that we want to continue to improve.
Yes, and I have one more statement that I have to have for 2023. That I have been thinking about. I always think about what is it going to be for 2020, the next year. So for 2023, I'd like to hear us all be saying, let's think about we while being me more often.
Ooh, I like that. Let's think about we while still being me.
By still being and doing for me more often.
Excellent.
That's at least my thought process for 2023.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. So Jim Dieter, let me know what you think. That's the most open-ended question I can make. We've been all over. You've got a lot to contribute in many different ways. How do you want to?
Yeah, it's really all very interesting. And I want to start by saying that we're going to, with the Jacobs heavy involvement and backing, we're going to start a state and local asset leadership board this year. So it's we've been doing it all along in different ways, but there's the issues and topics that cut across sectors, but then there's also how can we have more impact within specific sectors. And the state and local market is it's huge. There's a lot going on in asset management in that realm. But there's still people that aren't there or haven't started. One of the efforts I'm working on with Jacobs is in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we were meeting with their, one of the leaders in the city that works directly for the mayor. And he had a simple question about asset management and what we were doing. And that was why? Why? And that's been my word of the last half of this year. I came across the Simon Sinek book, which if you haven't caught up to or seen, it's several years old now. And I read it years ago, kind of rejected it, but because I didn't like he was a real Apple and Southwest fanboy, but I got into more of the theory this time than his examples. But it ties to the comments people have been making around mission. We've treated mission to this point as sort of like, well, every organization knows what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that really isn't true. It's, I worked for small companies and it was really obvious what the mission was, and everybody could support it. And you pretty much knew how to make decisions because you knew what the mission was, you knew what the why, the vision, really more so than maybe we start thinking of it, as vision as part of this equation and not just mission. But once you know why you're doing things, the St. Petersburg story, they have a great, take on their really comprehend and understand their constituents as all the stakeholders, all the residents, voters, you name it, employees, people of the city. And they're trying to create the best environment for those people, as well as for tourists and other people that come and for pleasure and to benefit their economy. And if you have that kind of a frame, then it starts from there that you do asset management, not from just making sure the pump runs, but back to the mission dependency index. What are we really supporting? What are we trying to do? And what's going to have the biggest impact? That was when I was in St. Petersburg for this meeting recently. We were sitting for lunch. We were sitting at a restaurant near the water, and between us and the water, there was this beautiful city park with beautiful trees in it. And it's like, what is the value of that park? That restaurant, that experience would have been much less, if it existed at all, without that beautiful city park there that provides that benefit to people there every day. So what's important on the extreme other end, if the hurricane had hit there instead of further south on the coast, would have been a very different conversation. So back to the comments that were made about, well, how do people get started on doing this? Something has to really go wrong. Yeah, well, that's a common way. Is the let's see, how can I say this and not use inappropriate language? The oh heck moment. Something really bad happens, and there wasn't a plan in place for it. And asset management, provides those sort of plans or mechanisms to organize, to know what you have and to know what's important. But it's to tie it back to the vision. If you lose track of your vision and why you're doing things, then the decisions all the way down start to become foggy. So what's our motivation in this scene? Why are we doing this? If you know why you're doing it for your organization, decisions become easier and straightforward. One last thought is I'm really focused on asset management as not managing assets as the forefront thing, although it's a huge part of asset management and we need to correct our language around it. But it's those bringing together all those parts of the organization. So in a way, we were talking about the silos and breaking down silos. Maybe another interesting way to conceive that is organizing the silos to work together, and to achieve that mission and vision.
That's the first time I've heard a variation on the silo theme, and I really like that because large organizations are more efficient by having division of labor. And we can't say that those mechanisms are bad, but they can work together better. Love it, Jim.
Thanks.
Thank you for the leadership and insights like that you provide the ALN. And now I'm going to put Nick on the spot.
Okay.
Bring Nick in and have him talk about outcomes to lead off the discussion. So David and Meighan and Cecilia, if you'll join us too. So Nick, you've been paying attention. You've been making some excellent highlights. You've got some insights on outcomes. What have you learned?
Well, yeah, I mean, lots of good things have been said. One thought that most recently occurred to me is just to consider asset management and leadership, not just being in place as a form of risk management, but also the other side of risk opportunity. When not just when things go wrong, what do we do, but the chance to actually create value to get ahead when the conditions are right. And so just having something in place so that you're ready to go when what you had always been hoping for would occurs, and being able to move quickly in a good direction as a unified body. That was kind of the main thing on my mind at this moment.
Well, Nick, you always blow me away because Jim, isn't that the perfect lead-in for our conversation next week with Peter Duffy?
Oh, that's where my mind went. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because Nick, you're absolutely right to look at the positive side of things. We want to do it from an asset base. Mike, we had talked to that other company that we were looking at partnering with, and asset-based leadership is the thing that we're talking about in Asset Leadership Network. It's looking at assets from a whole different perspective, a more inclusive, both tangible and intangible. Jim, what's the definition of an asset? Anything that brings value to the organization. And so the most valuable thing are, first of all, in my mind, this is the Cecilia, relationships. If you don't have relationships, you won't have good data, you won't manage risk, you won't seize opportunity, you will miss out no matter what. If you're not properly engaging your stakeholders and
David looks like he wants to jump in.
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, I like that. I've listened to Cecilia speak several times, and it's always about people. It's always about stakeholders. And so, yeah, I'm just excited that we will continue to do that.
And others might not have seen it, but when Cecilia was talking about stakeholders, Meighan came on and gave applause. Meighan, you want to jump in?
Sure, it is. It is, stakeholders is probably too broad of a word, right? And we do need to make sure that we are inclusive, we're equitable, and that we actually, I love all the language today has been great because it is exactly what's going on. It is not tearing down silos as teaching the silos to collaborate and to cross-pollinate. It is about spreading that corn so we all succeed. It's all of these things together are really what I do day in and day out. What we're all trying to do day in and day out for the good of our customers, for the good of these organizations, for the good of the missions, to be successful and to be more effective and efficient.
Well, the concept of the silos and stovepipes is not always bad, because I mean that's where the career progression occurs for some, and the proficiency and the competencies occur within those functional areas. But when we get everybody on the same page as an organization and moving, then the tough part becomes managing the seams between, or the handoffs between each of those processes, because sometimes they are linear in a process of, as far as designing a project and then putting it out for bid and then constructing it and so on and so forth. But sometimes it happens all at once. And so recognizing who's involved and what role each one has, and then identifying where there might be a disconnect, and it might not be apparent until it happens. It's that bad part, but still, codifying it, recognizing it, and then not repeating it is the challenge in managing those seams. So
let me hook onto that, David, and say that it's critical in that question mark of handoffs to actually have that understanding of the relationships a priori. If you do not have that understanding of who is involved and who needs to be involved, you will not get to the point where indeed you can do the handoffs. And you might miss a critical handoff, or you might miss the person who has the data that knows what needs to be done. And that one little miss. And it can be somebody very small. It's normally somebody that is not the major player or CEO or
Correct.
C-suite or officer.
Very unintended in the process that occurs, but right. And how do we capture all of that or know that? I mean, that's where the lessons learned and the best practices come into play, is that these are the things to consider. It doesn't mean that every line item is applicable to every activity, but in the universe of discussion of how people interact and how projects or programs or discussions interact, have you considered should come into play, and then you decide applicable or not applicable. But inviting someone to sit down at the table, whether they're impacted or just want to be socially aware of what's going on in their community, that's invaluable in one of those necessary steps.
Meighan,
It's
you're
the step that
involved.
makes them feel belonging. It's the belonging step that makes
Yeah.
them part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Excellent, Cecilia. That's kind of a better way of phrasing what I was going to ask Meighan. How are you helping internally to have people feel that belonging?
So it's about advocating for the value that asset management brings to our organization. And so I've been slowly advocating for years and kind of positioning my team to be supportive of asset management inside Serco. So it's taken hold, it actually took hold internationally first in Serco. I had some collaborators who were on the same page with me. And so we drove this as a forum where we got together monthly and tried to look at how we could use our synergy together. That obviously helped us to come up with some messaging that we could take to our leadership over multiple times over the last 12 months or so, to say, we really think this is a better way of delivering what the Serco way of doing business. And when we could kind of capture that and show the return on investment and show that small investments in technology, in gathering data, in tracking data, yielded big results, we got their attention and they said, okay, go for it. And so it's actually now gone from international to now back in the US. And so supporting both folks in Sydney, folks in the Middle East, folks in the UK, Canada, North America.
Excellent. I think you just answered Professor John Wyatt's question about demonstrating value. And I'm not surprised that you went to Sydney. Australia is so far in front of us. I suspect that's where you got your support. And we are building our relationship with our Australian colleagues. And if we can leverage what you're doing, or you can leverage what we're doing, let's do that.
Absolutely. And I have some willing participants for the folks I'm working with in Sydney that would love to help push the message more in Australia. So yeah, more to come on that front.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
I got another piece that I missed in tying things together with my little rant on vision and mission, and that's about ESG. I think there's some propensity to look at it as a kind of a bolt-on thing that's done.
Yeah, it's not.
But yeah, with great companies, it's part of the vision, it's part of the mission, and in that way, it goes to all those silos, and it flows down to the stakeholders. If it's bolted on somewhere in the middle, I don't think probably so much. I don't know. I don't have a story for that, but
I do. So I was actually on a plane last week. During all the crazy storms, we managed to make our flights, and I happened to have the same pilot on my two legs. And so as he's doing his introductory speech, yada, 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 about how high in the air we were flying and when we get there, he goes, and just so you know, this plane has this much fuel on board. We burn half gallon per minute. And if you were driving the same amount of distance, you would spend, whatever, you'd have to do 75 gallons of gas. where we only spend 20 gallons of gas. So you're actually more environmentally friendly by flying in a plane. And then on the second plane, he adjusted it for the numbers of people on the plane and how many gallons of gas it would take. And it was actually like, there you go. There's my footprint for traveling today. Oh,
That's really cool. Yeah. Nice.
Very good. Well, we're closing in on the hour. Nick, will you start us off with some closing statements? And since you've been around the whole month, you can go back as far as you want to, about things.
Oh, well, I don't want to go back through the archives of my mind right now on the spot because it would take our remaining 5 minutes, but I'll just say what came to mind when Meighan was speaking about that overachieving pilot, which was awesome. An architect comes to mind. I think Bjarke Ingels is how his name is said, and he's fairly famous for a number of projects all over the world, but also I think for coining a phrase called hedonistic sustainability. And my understanding of that principle is that sustainable design that incorporates principles of sustainability, environmental sustainability, but not to the detriment of quality of life, ease of use, financial sustainability, really doing sustainability, among other reasons, because it feels better, because it works better, because it looks better. And I really hope that asset management, leadership, ESG, a lot of these things will start to be seen more and more for their success stories as not just things that organizations in parts of the world are regulated to do, not just because we want to fight climate change alone, but because it can improve all aspects of achieving the mission.
So Nick ended our in-person event at the National Academy of Sciences by saying we need to make asset management more sexy. And just today I thought of a fictional story about somebody who uses asset management to improve their sex life. And I will draft it up and share it with you. It'll only be upon request. I will not publicly make that available.
And I must say now that was not, what I had in mind when I said that at the in-person event. I was saying that more because I really believe asset management and asset leadership has the capacity to, the way Mike started talking about in Buffalo, the opportunity to improve equity, opportunity to improve sustainability, and really address some of the, as Mike likes to say, these giant problems facing our world today. Well, we may be looking at a really giant solution here if it can be implemented well and broadly.
So I got you all to laugh. That was the main thing. Cecilia, do you have a closing statement?
Well, I would just say that when we think about an organization and its life force, the mission is the most important thing for it to have to set out, and its understanding of its relationships. And when we think about making sure that it is integrating mission so that everybody from the top to the bottom understands, this is a time that we might start thinking about using story. The SAMP is a story. The strategic asset management plan is a story of the way we're going to make mission of the organization come to life. Who are we going to do that with? How are we going to do it? Who's going to help us? The whole thing. Start telling the story more. Make it easier for people to understand that ISO 55001 is a checklist. It's a story. You write the story. You already have your story written. Begin writing it intentionally and mindfully, inviting others to the table, the unusual suspects, and thinking we as you do me.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, for joining us from Columbia and making this an international panel. I appreciate that.
You know, I
Meighan?
love the ALN. I left the beach to come back home so that I could do this.
Thank you.
I don't
impressive.
have a lot to say for closing, but thank you, Mike, for the opportunity today.
Thank you for joining us, Meighan. We always love your insights. You hit the nail on the head consistently. David?
I certainly cannot top Cecilia's closing. I think that's awesome. It captures everything we've talked about, not just today, but also for the whole month. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground through this month. So thank you, Cecilia, for joining. That was an unexpected pleasure. Thanks.
I would do anything for ALN. And you know what? It was my pleasure to, even on my last day, this is literally my last day in the warmth and sunshine before I return to Chicago's cold, although you've warmed it up for me a little, Miguel.
Yes. And thank you,
Great
David, for
holiday.
joining us and for the corn story, which I'll talk with you about later. Jim, advancing outcomes with asset leadership. Been a good month.
So it occurs to me the Buffalo story. The only reason that Buffalo story is on the paper today because it became very visible very quickly. It makes you understand that those same decisions and decision-making processes are in place broadly and deeply in organizations. That equity that we see that and we're appalled, but we're only appalled because we heard of that. What in our own counties, in our own cities, what is going on that's the same. And then I want to say, the ALN is definitely a vision organization, and it's all about just amazing people, and the circle keeps getting larger. And David and Meighan, we're going to be trying to tap you guys to do more and more, over this coming year, because you both just brought a lot today. And of course, Cecilia is a superhero already. So.
No. I just said to Nick that ALN is part of my North Star because so much of what you do, and Mike really, Jim, of course you, without question. I mean, you were the one that pulled me in the first place, but Mike has done such an outstanding job of continual outreach in a year that has been so difficult for him personally. I just want to say to you, both personally and professionally, Mike, you've been an inspiration in what you've done as executive director of ALN.
Oh, thank you very much.
How you've kept everybody together, kept doing the programming. I thought you were doing too much. I know I slacked off on my equity work, but we'll be back to we and me in 8 and 23. But it's amazing. And I just want to wish each of you a most joyful end of this year, and this was a joy-filled way for me to end the year. It will be a joyful year to come together and see how we can help make a difference in the world, both in our ALN world and ISO 55000 world, but also expanding out, connecting like Mike has done so well. Jim planted the seed so long ago, and it's just been critical to me professionally to be part of this organization and to be able to continue to see broadly the connections that can make a difference in things that are being done in ESG and other areas, DI, everything. So ALN, like you said once, Mike, ALN ISO 55000 can make a difference for everything and everybody. Bring peace to the world.
Yeah, it's kind of clear that blowing up things is not good management of those assets. But anyway, you mentioned Jim planted the seed, and that seed is now a corn seed. And David's positive reinforcement of the ALN as a rapid deployment force for best practices really helps us have a North Star for our coming year. So thank you, Cecilia, for mentioning, saying that ALN's a North Star, but I think we've got this North Star of rapid deployment of best practices. So thank you all. Nick, can you bring us home with the final credits?
Yeah, of course. Just Thanks everyone for being here today, and thank you especially to our patron members, Jacobs especially for sponsoring this week, and our other organizational members, including Serco. And with that, I will say, hope to see you next year, next week and next year in 2023 to talk to Peter Duffy. And
Yeah, we're starting it off strong with Peter. Don't miss that one.
Yeah, yeah.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.
thank you. Bye.
Feliz año nuevo, próspero año.